That watch belonged to my son. The words landed in the middle of the hospital corridor like something dropped from a great height. Not shouted, not even raised. Just placed there, with the full weight of a woman who had spent 60 years making rooms go quiet whenever she wanted them to. Every nurse on the floor seemed to freeze at once. A cart stopped rolling. A door that had been swinging slowly clicked shut and stayed there. Owen Calloway stood at the end of the hall near the supply closet, holding a blood pressure cuff he no longer remembered picking up. His shift had started 40 minutes ago. He had been thinking about whether he had left the stove on at home, whether his car would make it through another winter, whether the coffee in the break room was still warm enough to bother with. He had not been thinking about the watch, but now Harriet Caulfield, 71 years old, silver-haired, wearing a coat that probably cost more than 3 months of his salary, was standing 12 feet away with one finger pointed directly at his wrist. Her son, James Caulfield, stood slightly behind her. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, the kind of man who wore a dark suit on a Tuesday morning in a hospital and made it look ordinary. He had the same jaw as his mother, the same stillness. The kind of stillness that came not from calm but from certainty. The certainty that whatever needed to happen next would happen because they needed it to. Owen looked down at the watch on his left wrist. It was there, where it always was. Thin leather strap worn pale at the edges. Silver face, no markings. Small, plain, the kind of watch nobody looked at twice. He looked back up. Harriet Caulfield had not moved. "Ma'am," he said carefully. He could hear his own voice doing the thing it did when he was managing a difficult patient. Level, soft, deliberate. "I think there may be a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," Harriet said. "My son wore that watch the day he was brought into this hospital. It was not among his personal effects when we collected them. Now I'm looking at it on your wrist." The corridor had gone very still. Mira Solis, the charge nurse, had appeared from around the corner. She stood near the nurse's station with her arms folded and her face arranged in the expression Owen recognized as professional neutrality, which meant she was calculating something he was not going to like. Owen did not move, not because he was afraid, though he was, but because something in him understood, suddenly and clearly, that whatever he did in the next 10 seconds would define what happened in the next 10 years. He placed the blood pressure cuff on the nearest cart. He turned to face Harriet Caulfield fully, and he said quietly, "This watch belonged to my grandfather. He gave it to me 6 years ago, 6 months before he died." Harriet's eyes did not soften. They sharpened. Not a question, an inventory. The way she said it reminded Owen of a teacher reading a wrong answer off a test. Polite, informed, devastating in tone. "Yes," he said. He held her gaze. He did not look at James. He did not look at Mira. He did not look at the 2 other nurses who had stopped pretending to work. "His name was Samuel Cole. He raised me after my mother passed. He worked in this city his whole life. He never took anything that wasn't his." Something shifted in Harriet's face. It was not softness. It was more like the surface of water when something moves beneath it. James Caulfield cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should take this to an office." Owen looked at him then, for the first time. "No," he said. James blinked. Owen's voice stayed quiet, but something underneath it had gone harder. "Your mother accused me in front of this entire floor. If there's something to discuss, we discuss it here." The word settled into the air. Nobody breathed it in or out. It just sat there, taking up space. Mira moved one step closer. "Owen, maybe it would help everyone if we Mira." He looked at her. Just her name. She stopped. He turned back to Harriet Caulfield. He was scared. He knew that clearly. He was scared in the way that lives in the stomach, low and cold and very quiet. He was scared of losing a job he had worked 7 years to build. Scared of what accusations could follow a person through a career even when they were false. Scared of what it meant to stand here in front of someone who owned 3 buildings in this city, and explain that he was not a thief. But he was more scared of what it would mean if he didn't. "My grandfather gave me this watch," Owen said. "He kept it in a wooden box on his workbench. He let me hold it when I was small. When I was 26 and he knew he was sick, he put it in my hand and told me to keep it close." Harriet's jaw tightened. "Convenient sentiment." "It's not sentiment," Owen said. He unstrapped the watch from his wrist. His hands were steady. He did not know how. He turned it over, holding it so the face caught the fluorescent light overhead. "His initials are engraved on the back. SC. Samuel Cole." He held it out so the corridor could see. Not Harriet alone, the whole floor. Harriet's hand moved toward it. Owen pulled back half an inch. "I offered for you to see it," he said, "not to take it." James Caulfield's expression changed. Something moved through his face that was harder to name than the anger his mother wore. Something that looked almost like discomfort. Harriet's voice came lower. "Those initials could mean anything." "They could," Owen said. "But they've been there since before your son was born." The corridor went quiet again. Different this time. Harriet had walked in here as a woman's in absolute command of this situation. Money, name, grief. She had all 3 and she knew how to use them. Owen had understood that the moment he saw her. People like Harriet Caulfield did not need proof before they spoke. The speaking was the proof. But now she looked at him differently. Still hard, still certain. But there was a hairline fracture somewhere behind her eyes. Doubt maybe, or something older than doubt. Owen looked at the watch in his palm. He thought about Samuel Cole. He thought about the apartment on Birch Street, that smelled like sawdust and coffee grounds, and the particular kind of silence a man keeps when he is protecting something. He thought about the Tuesday afternoons when he was a child and Samuel would take the wooden box down from the shelf and hold the watch, like it was something borrowed from someone else's life. Owen had asked once where it came from. Samuel had said only, from someone who deserved better. He had never explained. Owen had not asked again. He had been 9, he hadn't known how. He lifted his eyes back to Harriet. My grandfather's name was Samuel Cole, he said. He worked in this city for over 30 years. He raised me after my mother died when I was 7. He didn't own much, he didn't ask for much. But he was honest every day of his life, and I will not stand here and let you say otherwise. Harriet's face did not move. But something in James Caulfield's did. He had been watching Owen the way a person watches something that doesn't fit the picture they came in with. His head was slightly tilted. His mouth was slightly open. He was thinking. Mother, James said. When exactly was the watch last seen? Harriet looked at him sharply. I saw it on Arthur the morning he was admitted. James nodded slowly. And the hospital listed it among the items that weren't returned. It was not returned. James turned back to Owen. How long have you worked this floor? 7 years, Owen said. 4 years before that in the ICU downstairs. James looked at the watch in Owen's palm, not at the face of it, at the back of it, at the initials, he said. Not to take it, may I look? Owen registered the difference. He held the watch out. James leaned forward. He did not touch it. He studied the engraving on the back with the care of a man who had spent years reading documents that other people wanted him to misread. His face changed. Mother, he said. His voice was even, but it had shifted somewhere underneath. There's a year here, below the initials. Harriet's chin lifted. That means nothing. It means the engraving was done in. James straightened slowly. 1961. The number sat in the corridor like a stranger who had arrived without being invited. Owen stared at it. Harriet stared at her son, Mira Solis, let out a breath she had been holding for 3 minutes. James looked at his mother. Arthur was born in 1963. Nobody spoke? Owen's mind was still catching up. 1961. Samuel had been 23 in 1961. Young, working, living in a city that had not always been kind to him. And the watch? The watch that had sat in the wooden box on the workbench that Samuel had held like something borrowed, had been engraved 2 years before the man Harriet was mourning even existed. This watch, Owen said slowly, could not have been made for your son. Harriet's eyes snapped to him. You don't know when it was engraved. The date is right there, James said. Dates can be added, Mother. There was something in James's voice now that Owen had not heard before. Quiet and a little tired. The engraving is worn. It's under decades of scratches. That date is old. Harriet turned away from both of them. She walked to the window at the end of the corridor and stood there looking out at the city for 10 seconds. Maybe 15. Her back was straight. Her coat was perfect. From behind she looked exactly like a woman who was still in control. She was not. Owen knew it. James knew it. The floor knew it. He looked down at SC in the scratched silver. He thought about Samuel again, about the box on the shelf, about the way his grandfather would sit at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings not quite looking at anything, the way some people sit when they are thinking about a life that runs parallel to the one they're in. He had always thought that stillness was just who Samuel was. Now he wasn't sure. Harriet came back from the window. Where did your grandfather get it? She said. Her voice was different. The edges of it had changed, sharper in some places, softer in others. I don't know, Owen said honestly. He never told me. Harriet looked at him for a long time. Then she did something Owen had not expected. She looked away first. James said quietly, Owen, did your grandfather ever mention our family? No, Owen said. He didn't talk much about people from the past. When I was a kid I thought it was just how he was. Harriet made a sound, very small, almost nothing. But Owen heard it. James heard it too. He turned to his mother. Mom, she said nothing. What aren't you saying? Harriet's hands moved. Just slightly. They pressed together in front of her and then released. The gesture of someone trying to hold something in that no longer fits in the space where it's been kept. His name, she said at last, Samuel Cole. Owen went still. There was a man by that name, Harriet said. He worked for my family a long time ago before I was married, before Arthur was born. She stopped. He was close to someone in our family, my late husband's brother. Thomas. Owen felt something cold move through his chest. Not fear exactly, something older. Close how? James said. Harriet looked out the window again. They grew up together. Thomas and Samuel went to the same school on the east side, back when that neighborhood was. She stopped again. The pause meant something. Owen could feel the shape of what it was hiding. Thomas brought him to the house once. My father-in-law refused to have him back. Why? Owen said. Harriet's jaw moved. Because he was Samuel Cole and not a Caulfield. The answer landed flatly. Nothing decorated it. Nothing needed to. My father-in-law was a particular kind of man, Harriet said. He believed the family name was a wall. And he was very careful about who he let stand inside it. James was looking at his mother with an expression Owen could not quite read. "You're saying Thomas and Samuel were friends?" "More than friends," Harriet said. Then she stopped. Then she seemed to decide something. "I never knew exactly what it was between them. I was young when it happened. I only know what my father-in-law said, and what he said was that Samuel Cole was a problem that needed to be managed." Owen's fingers curled around the watch. "Manage," he repeated. Harriet flinched, barely, but it was there. "Thomas was supposed to take over the company," she said. "When my father-in-law discovered what he and Samuel were," she chose the word slowly, "to each other, he told Thomas it had to end. He told him Samuel had been paid to leave. He told him the friendship had been a manipulation." "Was it?" Owen said. Harriet looked at him. "No," she said, one word, very quiet. "No. I found a letter years later. Thomas had kept it hidden in a Bible he left to me when he died. Samuel had written to Thomas from another city. He hadn't paid to leave. He had been told to leave. He had been told his job prospects in this city would disappear if he didn't. He had been told." She stopped. "He said he was sorry. He said he had tried to stay. He said there were things he couldn't fight." The corridor was not just quiet now, it was holding its breath. Owen looked at the watch in his palm. SC 1961. His grandfather at 23, writing a letter from another city to a man who had kept it hidden in a Bible for the rest of his life. "My grandfather never married," Owen said. It wasn't a question, he already knew the answer. He had just never thought to ask what it meant. Harriet looked at him and something shifted in her face. Not softness, not quite. But the hardness that had been there since she walked through the hospital doors had changed texture. It had been the hardness of certainty. Now it was the hardness of a woman trying not to fall apart in a fluorescent-lit corridor. "Thomas never married either," she said. James looked at his mother, then at Owen, then at the watch. "The watch," James said carefully. "Thomas gave it to Samuel." "It wasn't a question either," Harriet nodded. "Once, I think so. It was made as a pair. 2 watches, one for Thomas's, one for someone he..." She stopped. "I only ever saw Thomas's watch. I assumed the other one had been sold or lost. I never thought to ask where it went." "Samuel kept it," said. His voice was very quiet now. "He kept it in a wooden box on his workbench and took it out on Sunday mornings and never explained why." Harriet said nothing. When Arthur was admitted, Owen said, "Which watch did he have?" The question landed differently than Harriet expected. He saw that in her face. "Thomas's watch," she said slowly. "Arthur inherited it from Thomas when he passed. They were close, the two of them. Arthur loved him." James stepped forward. "So Arthur had Thomas's watch. Samuel had the other one. Matching pair, one on each side of a story your father-in-law tried to end." Harriet's eyes filled. She did not blink, she refused to, but her eyes filled. "And when Arthur died," James continued, more gently, "you collected his belongings and Thomas's watch was there, and you thought..." "I thought I recognized it," Harriet said. Her voice cracked at the end. "I thought I knew what I was looking at." Owen looked at her. He thought about what it meant to be 71 years old, and still carrying the shape of a grief you understood, and a history you didn't. And to walk into a hospital corridor and see something that looked, in the fluorescent light and the blur of loss, like something that had been taken. He thought about Samuel at the workbench. About the letter hidden in a Bible. About 2 men who had not been allowed to keep what they had built between them, and had each spent decades carrying half of a matching pair. Owen straightened his shoulders. His hands were still shaking, but he did not hide them. "Mrs. Caulfield," he said. She looked at him. "I believe you loved your son," he said. "I believe you walked in here certain of what you saw, and I believe the grief is real." He paused. "But this watch is not what you thought it was. And my grandfather was not what your father-in-law called him." Harriet's mouth pressed together. A muscle moved in her jaw. James was very still. Owen continued. "Samuel Cole raised me in a 2-bedroom apartment with one window that didn't close all the way in winter. He packed my lunch every day until I was old enough to make my own. He taught me to read a watch before I could read a book. He told me once that some things in life you carry quietly because the world isn't ready for them yet." He stopped. "I didn't understand what he meant when he was alive. I think I understand it now." Harriet's eyes finally spilled over, not theatrically, not in the way of someone performing grief. Just 2 thin lines down her face that she made no move to wipe away. "I owe you an apology," she said. The words came out carefully, the way a person speaks when they are not used to saying something and they want to get it right. "I accused you in front of your colleagues," she said. "I assumed the worst, because it was easier than sitting with the possibility that I was wrong. And because," she stopped, "because when you lose a child you look for things to hold on to, and sometimes you hold on to the wrong things." James looked at the floor. Owen did not say it was all right because it wasn't entirely yet, but he nodded. "The watch," Harriet said, looking at it one last time. "It belongs with you." 3 words. Small and complete. Mira Solis, who had not moved in several minutes, let out another long breath. One of the younger nurses near the far station began to turn back toward what she had been doing, then stopped, then turned back to watch. "I want to know more," James said quietly. He was not speaking to his mother. He was speaking to Owen. "About Samuel, about Thomas, about what my grandfather took from both of them." He paused, not to contest anything, to understand it. Owen looked at him. He thought about the wooden box, about the Sunday mornings, about a letter in a Bible that two people had been allowed to be something to each other only in hidden spaces. "So do I," Owen said. Harriet looked at both of them. She looked older now than she had when she walked in. But she also looked less armored. Less like a storm and more like a woman standing in the aftermath of one. "Thomas talked about him," she said softly. "Near the end. When he was sick and the things he had kept quiet for 50 years started coming out. He said Samuel had been the only person who ever made him feel like himself." She looked at the watch in Owen's hand. "He said he had been a coward. He said he should have fought harder." Owen closed his fingers around the watch. "He kept the other one," Owen said. "Samuel did, until he died. And then he gave it to me." Harriet nodded. Her voice had gone very small. "Then they both kept faith," she said. The corridor was quiet again. But it was different from the quiet that had come before. That first quiet had been the kind that happens when a room is waiting for something to break. This one was the kind that comes after something has been repaired imperfectly but honestly, with people still standing inside the damage, not entirely sure what to do with their hands. Owen strapped the watch back onto his wrist. The clasp clicked. It sounded, in the silence of that hallway, much louder than it should have. Harriet watched him fasten it. She didn't look away. She watched it go back to where it belonged as though she were witnessing something that had needed to happen for a very long time. James put his hand on his mother's arm. She didn't shake it off. "Owen," Mira said very carefully, from the nurse's station. "You have a patient in room 4. He looked at her. She was giving him a way back to the ordinary. He understood that. He picked up the blood pressure cuff from the cart where he had set it. He straightened his badge. He looked once more at Harriet Caulfield, who had walked into this hospital an hour ago as a woman in absolute command of the truth, and was now standing quietly in the hallway with her son's hand on her arm, looking at the floor. "I'll come find you," he said. "When my shift is done. I have a box at home. Some photographs, a few papers. Things Samuel left. I'd like to go through them with someone who knew Thomas." Harriet looked up. "You would do that?" she said. Owen thought about the wooden box on the workbench, about what it meant to carry something quietly for decades because the world was not ready, about two men who had kept matching watches and kept faith across a distance that someone else had made, and who had never been allowed to say plainly what they were to each other. He thought about what it would mean for that story to stay buried one more generation. "He deserves to be known," Owen said. "They both do." Harriet Caulfield, 71 years old, who had spent decades building a life behind the walls of a family name, lowered her head. Not in defeat, something different. Something that took more courage than the certainty she had walked in wearing. She said, "Yes, they do." That morning Owen finished shift the way he always did. Room by room, task by task, the ordinary work of a man who had chosen to spend his life making other people's worst days slightly less unbearable. His hands remembered what to do even when his mind was still back in the corridor, still holding the watch up to the light. When he locked up his locker that evening, he stood for a moment with his hand on the cold metal door. Samuel Cole had carried something alone for 60 years. He had folded it into silence and tucked it away in a wooden box, and given it to a 9-year-old boy without explanation. Maybe because explanation wasn't possible then. Or maybe because he believed that one day the boy would grow up into someone who would stand in a corridor and refuse to put it down. Owen pulled his coat on. He touched the watch through the fabric of his sleeve. He thought of the letter in the Bible. He thought of Harriet Caulfield's face in the moment before her certainty cracked. He thought of James saying they both kept faith, and the way that sentence had sat in the air like something that had been waiting years for permission to exist. He thought, "I didn't know what he gave me. I thought it was just a watch." He walked out into the early evening. The air was cold and clear and smelled like the city beginning its next shift. The way cities always do. Indifferent to what happened inside them. Never knowing whose stories are moving through their streets at any given moment. Silent and patient and waiting for someone to finally say them out loud. He had a box at home. He had a phone number on a card that James Caulfield had pressed into his hand before they left the corridor. And for the first time in 34 years, Samuel Cole's story had somewhere to go.